following on from our pineapple beer that we made a couple of weeks ago. Today we're going to make a recipe called a smash, which stands for single malt and single hop. Very simple recipe: 1 malt, 1 hop, 1 pot. I've got this handy beer pot, and most kitchens should have them. They've got multiple uses. I find a lot of people use them to make pasta. It's got a removable sieve, which is quite handy. We'll need 1 kilogram of milled grain, 5 liters of water, a thermometer, and a spoon, and some hops. So to make a beer, there are 4 simple processes: mash, boil, cool, and ferment. Mashing is the process of adding grain to fairly hot water. The water must be around about 68 degrees Celsius, and it needs to stay there for around about an hour. Once the mash is complete, we then go to the boil. Boiling gets rid of any impurities and to sterilize it. The boil will last around about an hour. We then cool it down as fast as possible so that we can introduce yeast into this. And then once we introduce the yeast over around about 20 degrees Celsius, we then let the yeast do its work and ferment for a couple of weeks. So I'm now preparing to mash. I'm going to add 5 liters of water to the pot and then bring it up to around about 70 degrees Celsius. We're going to use this vessel later as our fermentation vessel. I'm preparing the water now. I'm trying to get it up to about 70 degrees. At 70 degrees we will add in our malt. The malt is slightly colder than the water, so it will bring the temperature down a little bit. We're looking for a target of around about 67 degrees Celsius. For the 60 minutes we will get a really good conversion of carbohydrates to the sugars that we want. We're looking for maltose sugars, and they are very simple sugars for our very simple yeast. It's important that we keep this temperature, so a thermometer is required. Okay, we've got to 70 degrees. Now I'm going to add in my malt. You want to stir it. You don't want clumps sticking together and forming. And we want to keep that there for the next 60 minutes. Every few minutes you want to turn the burner on just to keep the temperature up. We're sitting just on 65 degrees at the moment. So I want to push it up until it's about 67 and keep it there. Okay, it's lunchtime and I've been banished from the kitchen. So I've moved everything downstairs into the cottage. All you need is a heat source. Every now and again you put the element on just to keep the temperature up. Okay, it's been an hour now at 67 degrees. I think all our sugar conversions have been done, which should give us about a 5% beer at the end of the day. So what I'm going to do now is crank up the temperature a bit, take the grains out, and then let this liquid boil. I'm going to let it drain into this pan, otherwise my arms are going to get tired and I'll drop something. This is what it looks like. Before it gets to the boil, to remove the lid, otherwise it's going to boil over and make a holy mess, and you won't be allowed to do this in the kitchen at home anymore. So just remember to keep it coming back and checking it every couple of minutes. What we need to do now is just plan for our hopping schedule. We're using a hop called Eureka or Eucanot, and it's got a very high alpha acid ratio, which means it can be very bitter, but this is quite an aromatic hop, so you can use it for bittering and aroma. Because it's got a high alpha acid, around about 17%, we are only going to add a very small portion of it right in the beginning. So we're going to use about 20 grams altogether. Comes in a packet like this. So I'm going to split the packet up into 5 grams in the beginning, and the rest is going to go in right at the end of the boil. That way we're not going to be too bitter. Okay, our boil has just started. I'm going to add 5 grams of the hops right now at the beginning. So we're going to boil them in the liquid for 60 minutes. The rest we're going to add in right at the end. Smell amazing. Okay, we 40 minutes into our boil now. Checking everything looks good. It's time to crack open a beer. Cheers. Been boiling for 60 minutes now. It's about time to switch it off. Everything looks good. It smells delicious. I'm going to switch it off, take it off the heat, put the other hops in. These hops I'm going to let stand for about 10 minutes and then I'm going to start the cooling. It's quite important to cool this wort down now. We need to cool it down to below 60 as soon as possible. It's been standing for a few minutes while the hops have been infusing. We put in 1 kilogram of grains into this mixture. When we took out 1 kilogram of grains, those kilogram of grains were infused with water, so we've taken that water out. This is a hack for small batches like this. What you would normally do is try and cool this down as quick as possible, but in this case what we're going to do is we're going to add 1 kilogram of ice, so to replace the water that we took out with the grains. We're not going to be diluting this beer in any way, and we're killing two birds with one stone. We're cooling it down and getting the gravity right. We're going to be putting our ice in now, bringing our temperature down as quick as possible. Another way of doing this is to freeze a couple of 2-litre Coke bottles with water in them the night before we brew. And if we then just dunk those bottles in, or we don't want to dilute the liquid that we've got here. While the liquid is cooling down, it's important that anything that it touches is sterile. So I will sterilize anything that it goes through, so we don't want it picking up bacteria. There's a little bit of crud at the bottom of the pot, which we don't want to take across. This is called trub or trub. You don't want that sitting in here and giving the yeast too much work to do. That we can leave behind and discard it. Well, this is just to show you what it looks like. There's a mixture of hops and protein that we don't want in the fermenter. Okay, finally the last thing that we're going to be doing now is we're going to do a thing called pitching the yeast. I've measured out 5 mils of yeast, which is enough for this amount of liquid. 5 mils of yeast into this 20 degrees Celsius. If you pitch it in when the temperature is too high, the yeast gets a bit angry and it starts giving out funny flavors. 20 degrees is happy. Pitch it in. Yeast uses oxygen in the first few hours to establish its colony. It then starts producing CO2. So we want to shake this up, introduce as much oxygen into the liquid as possible. Now we want to loosen a little bit and let it do its thing. There's a sugary liquid in here. There's some yeast in here. Yeast consumes sugar and excretes ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, if we seal this container up, it'll just build up and build up carbon dioxide, and eventually it'll just pop. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a one-way valve to let the CO2 out, but to not let other organisms or products in. You can see I've got a latex glove, cut a finger off it. I'm now going to use that finger as my one-way valve, and I'm just going to make a little hole in the top to let air out. What will happen is now the CO2 will just expel itself. It's starting to do it already. So it will blow up and then out the hole. Because it's forcing air out, nothing can come in, and when it finishes fermenting, the hole will just close up and fall over. I'll see you in a couple of days.